Hello world. We are live on Angular Air, and my name is Kent C. Dodds, and I'm your host. Let me turn on the light. Whoops. And I'm joined by two special guests, Paul Kozlowski. I know I
Yes,
can't say your name. Is that right? Kozlowski? Yeah, anyway.
Kozlowski. Perfect. Was good. Thank you.
And he's employed by Amadeus, but he works on the Angular project. And then we have Roderick Haddad, who's a CS student currently, and he actually interned with Google to work on the Angular project. So we're super excited to have them. My name is Kent C. Dodds. I work for Alianza, and I run this podcast. So let's go ahead and get into just a couple of announcements before we get into the show. So our next show is just next week. We are doing weekly shows, and this is with Julie Ralph, Andres Dominguez, and Zan Thresh about testing with Angular. So we'll be talking about end-to-end testing and unit testing, all of the goodness that you know and love about Angular testing we'll be covering in that episode. And then just as always, to stay up to date, follow us on Twitter and Google+, and check out our website, ng-air.github.io. And yeah, that is all of our regular announcements. So let's jump into things. So for each one of you, I have a question. How did you get involved with the Angular project? So Roderick, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
All right. Well, I started using it in one of my projects at a startup I was working in, and then I started connecting actually to the IRC channel on Freenode, for the Angularjs IRC channel, and helping people there, just chatting with people and talking about the project. And then I started watching the Angular repo on GitHub, started helping out with issues and pull requests, and then started sending my own about the things I cared about, I guess. So started in IRC, then moved to GitHub.
Cool. So it sounds like you were very, it was just kind of an organic kind of thing, right?
Yeah. I guess how I got to know Angular is by looking at other people's Plunkers where they had problems and helping them figure it out on IRC. Yeah, and just looking at the issues that interested me on GitHub and commenting on them, or trying to sell pull requests to solve them.
Cool. So how did you actually land your internship with the Angular team?
That happened in NGConf 2014. I actually have a talk called Angular Behind the Scenes that I did at last NGConf, where I talk about how I got my internship. It was a mix of showing them stuff that solved the problems they already have in like a creative way. I given that to the talk, and also I had some requests I wanted to review with the team, so that's how I got to interact with them in person. And they were like, "Hey, do you want to join as an intern?" And I said yes, and from there it was a regular Google process to get an internship.
Awesome, cool, thanks.
Contributing on GitHub, and they knew my name before meeting me in person, so getting noticed on GitHub definitely did help.
Cool. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Roderick. So, Paul, how did you get involved in the Angular project, and how long have you been involved?
Okay, so it was pretty organic for me as well, and it's kind of, I was preparing for this hangout today, and I realized it was over 3 years ago when I was like looking for a framework for myself and like reviewing the usual, suspects like Ember. Like I don't want to mention other names, but like Angular was the only thing that made sense for me from the very beginning. So I started to dig into it because it was so good, but at the same time it felt a bit magical, and I don't like magic in computer science. So started to hang out on going like a mailing list, Stack Overflow, ERC, and those kind of stuff. And I guess at one point I started to answer more questions than ask because people kind of noticed it, and I got a proposal to write a book on it, which I did with Peter, which is leading 1.4, like the Angular 1 right now. And I guess from this point on, like everything snowballed because of the book. Like I knew the team, so Misha was reviewing the book, Igor was helping us with the sample application. Then the conferences started, and like I was kind of getting closer to the team. And at one point, like when my company decided to use Angular and at the same time kind of contribute to it, not only just kind of get the open source, but also give back to the community, I kind of knew what I'm going to do. So this is my story.
Cool. Well, I know we all appreciate your contributions, both of you, to the Angular project. Can you tell us about the first contribution that you ever made? We'll start with Roderick.
The first one was a change to the compiler, actually. Very big change. It was Mishko had added support for like ng repeat start, ng repeat end, like having a directive have a start and an end, so that it could apply on multiple elements. But he just implemented it for attributes. So I wanted it to also work in other types of directive styles, so in classes, comments, and element names. And so that was my first contribution, changing the compiler. And that pull request got rejected. but the reasons were good, and in hindsight, I see why. It spurred a good discussion with Igor about it. But I learned so much from it, and it was my way of exploring the code base too. So that was my first contribution, my first pull request really to the project.
Awesome. What about you, pal?
I don't think I remember, but I'm pretty sure it was some kind of unimpressive documentation change or something like this. so I definitely didn't start with the compiler.
Yeah, Roderick makes you look like a just some guy, whatever. I'm doing the compiler. Like,
I can jump into the compiler. Yeah.
I've done a lot of documentation changes for sure. Like after that, so.
Well, and those documentation, like, we diminish that a little bit, but documentation is very valuable because more developers are going to read that than they read the source, right? So that's also very important. So not to diminish that, but I should probably go to GitHub and find your first contribution to the Angular project, because I'm sure it's a lot more interesting, or maybe not interesting, but it's kind of fun and nostalgic to look back at the first contribution to a library or framework.
Yeah, it is.
So, so what about contributions that you guys are particularly proud of, like, or something that we might just give you a high five for? Either one of you can start.
I guess I'll start since that's what we've been doing. My biggest contribution, I guess, that I'm proud of is during my internship. I got so just before I got my internship, a one-time binding landed in Angular, and then so my biggest contribution was re-implementing one-time binding and making interpolation more performant. And so just giving you numbers, we had this benchmark with 8,000 spans with interpolations in them, and that was taking about 60 milliseconds for it to render. And with my request, which is number 7700, it got that down from 60 milliseconds to 20 milliseconds. So that was like a 3x speed. So yeah, I guess that was the biggest one, making interpolation faster, and in the process re-implementing one-time binding.
Cool. High five. Thank you. Pal, what about you?
So, like, there are several ones that I remember. So maybe let's start with the most scary one. So, like, last February, I was actually visiting an Angular team in Mountain View. I thought it would be just kind of, friendly chat, coffee drinking, or like, I don't know, like, it would be relaxing. And then, like, arrived there, and like the second day, I was like pairing with Mishko on the compiler of Angular 2. I totally didn't know what I was doing, but I kind of survived. It got merged, so it was cool. But like more seriously, I think what I would like people to remember is that kind of everyone sees contributions as pushing code, but like people don't realize how much time we spent like actually not writing any code, but just going over the issues or like helping on the various support channels. And so what I would like people to remember me from is like all the time I spent on the mailing list, on the Stack Overflow, which I think like at one time with Peter we was like literally spending hours and hours just helping out people. And I think it's like also like as much as important as actually pushing code.
I like that. I think people like me who are using this framework, and I have like maybe 2 commits into Angular core, but yeah, so I haven't contributed a lot. But from my perspective as a user of this framework, I really appreciate people like you, Pal, who just spend hours on Stack Overflow or IRC or Gitter or wherever in the issues, helping us use this framework effectively to deliver value to our companies. I think that's incredibly valuable work. So yeah, thank you for doing that. And as thank you, I think that is valuable for us who have benefited from that to turn around and try to help others in the same way. And we all kind of learn and grow together, which, yeah, that's kind of like, I don't know, maybe cliche, but like it's a good thing.
Yeah, but in the end of the day, I think we are all together into it. Like we are all part of the same community. So like if you help others, you are growing the next contributors, and or guys like you who will like understand the framework and then like create some library, so other people can use it. So like I think like you give to the community and you get back as well. So that's kind of positive circle.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I remember so much time spending on IRC helping people, or just helping advance or progress or close issues. That's very satisfying. So they're definitely big contributions to the project. It's not just about code.
Yeah, actually, we wanted to talk about those kinds of contributions in the show. So, what are the different ways that people can contribute to Angular?
Okay, so maybe I will start, since I started to talk about non-code contributions. So I think like, yeah, like for everyone, the pushing a code to the core, or like hacking on the compiler is kind of holy grail of contribution, right? This is what comes to your mind. But there are so many ways where you can kind of engage with the community. And like, I mean, I've got so much respect for all the people that are like animating the community, doing conferences, so stuff like you are doing like right now. Just getting people together and making them share the knowledge. So this is huge. Then on the repository itself, there's so much work. I mean, there are like we mentioned all the documentation fixes, and this is just pretty amazing. Like how good Angular documentation is because of all those external contributions. But then there's all the issues, and there are some people coming and saying, oh, here's the issue. Someone opened it, but it's hard to reproduce. So I will actually spend time and attach a planker to this, so it's easier to figure out what's going on. Or you can actually read through the issue and say like, okay, this doesn't look like a valid. Actually, you've got a problem in your code, and so on and so on. And it might seem like a small contribution, but it's actually for us as the maintainers like a huge help. Because if we need to spend like half an hour on each issue just to figure out what's going on, it's kind of sums up to like huge amounts of time. And then there's obviously a code which I guess we will be talking about more. But like, yeah, there are so many ways of like this community around the framework, and is so huge that there's so many ways of getting involved. And when I'm thinking about the contributors that like recently joined the core team, actually most of them started by hanging out on GitHub and commenting on issues, and like this is how many people started.
So what about you're talking about helping with the issues. So if I'm creating an issue, like I think there's a bug in Angular, what would be the ideal issue if I were to write on an issue? What would that issue contain to help the Angular core team?
Right. So I think this is kind of topic close to my heart because I'm spending a lot of time on GitHub, like just like looking into the issues, and maybe so the best bug report is the one that we can reproduce and understand quickly, because currently we've got like a weekly patch releases for Angular 1, which means that if we can understand the problem and it's actually a bug that is fixable, it's quite probable that you are going to get a fix like in a few days. I mean, it will be released, merged to master released and so on. So in terms of like the whole release process, we are ready to handle issues very fast. So what stops us from actually getting things, like fixed in master is usually just actually reproducing the issue. And like it seems like when you are sitting in front of your application and you see the bug, it's like totally obvious for you what's wrong because you've got all the context. You know what the version of Angular you are using. You know what is the browsers that you are using. You know how to reproduce it. you know, like what are external libraries that are using. You've got like entire context. And when you like simply go to GitHub issues and it's like, okay, this doesn't work in my application, here's the code snippet, you are kind of taking away all this context from us. We just kind of don't have this information. And we need to go back and forth to people and say like, okay, what's the actual Angular version that you are using? What's the browser? Are you using an external address, any extensions in your browser, and so on and so forth. So like the perfect bug report for us is actually a live reproduced scenario with Planker or like GSP tool or any other tool that you prefer using, which has because it has everything. This has all the context that is needed, right? And I understand that it takes time to kind of like strip down your problem to those essential bits. But this is so vital. I mean, this is actually what helps us to fix the bug, because like really, if we understand it, we can fix it very, very fast.
I see. Yeah, I think, and lots of times when you're in the process of reproducing this bug, you find out that it was actually something else unrelated to what you were expecting, or you discover another bug or something else. So I think that process of reproducing the bug in a small, simple example can be very useful as well.
Yeah, I call it like magical Planker effect, when actually you are about to report a bug and you realize that no, it actually is not a bug, it was like some other interaction and so on. So yeah, definitely. I think it helps you and helps us in the end, so it helps everyone.
Mm-hmm. So I read a tweet, and I mentioned this in another episode, but Sindre Soares, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but anyway, he tweeted like 2 weeks ago something that I thought was really good. He said, when you're about to make an issue on one of my repositories, the best thing that you can do is instead make a pull request with a failing test, and even better, like something that will pass that test. But so like I think there are different levels of good issues where the lowest is like my app is broken, and I use your framework, and so I'm going to blame your framework. But then a little bit better is trying to explain some of the context of versions and stuff. Even better than that is an example, and then better than that is a failing test that demonstrates the bug, and then a fix as well. And so I think that like if you feel like you viewers, if you feel like that you're not like up to the task of actually fixing the bug yourself, see if you can figure out a way to write a failing test. And if you don't feel like you're quite up to that, at least reproduce it. It does take a little bit of time, but I think that if it's important for you to get the bug fixed, then that's one of the best ways that you can like ensure that your bug gets fixed fast.
Yeah, definitely. Like, we would love the bug reports in form of failing tests. This would be a total dream.
It's like heaven.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had like a couple of them in the past, but it doesn't happen too often. But this would be like ideal situation, definitely.
Yep. And also, there's like we've passed 4,000 tests, unit tests in Angular. So like you have a lot of places to look and get inspired on how to write your tests. So like if you're writing a new test and have no idea how to write it, just look around and see how other tests are written. Try to reproduce your scenario and see if it's failing.
Yeah, I have yet to actually do that in other people's libraries. I should do that, but for my own libraries, it's actually insanely helpful to write a failing test before I actually try to solve the issue. So awesome. Is there anything else about issues or like contributing from that perspective that you guys want to mention or talk about?
I wanted to say that contributing isn't just about opening issues and pull requests. It's also about helping out with the existing ones. We have over 1,000 issues and pull requests combined. So the smaller that number, the better. So even if the contribution is just about, hey, you didn't give enough information, so just helping out with progressing an issue is great.
Yeah, because like I think like people don't realize that like even small help is like a huge help for us, because like we've got like very limited number of maintainers, and then we've got like hundreds of thousands of people actually using the framework. So we will never scale. We will never be able to process all the things ourselves. So like even if you spend like 15 minutes on one issue and try to figure out what's going on, and you multiply it with the number of people in the community, I mean, this is just huge. We'll never be able to scale to this inside core contributors set of people.
Yeah, it's not because you can't close an issue, you don't have that button, that it means you can't help progress it. I mean, as a maintainer, seeing just, oh, I think this issue can be closed, like that's great. You just go over it, see it can be closed, and then say thank you, and then close it.
Yeah, actually, I remember there were some people that were coming and commenting, oh, yeah, this is invalid or this can be closed. And I was following some of those people, literally half a day just closing all the issues because they did such a good analysis. So yeah, this is definitely helpful.
Yep.
That's actually really interesting. I hadn't thought about just identifying issues that can be closed that are non-issues. Yeah, that's interesting. I think maybe what if we started something in the Angular community where everybody who uses the framework just spends 5 minutes every single day looking at some issue and trying to reproduce it or something? That would be pretty cool.
Let's do it. Or even
All right, we're gonna call it every I don't know, Friday afternoon when you're not ready to go home from work and you're bored. Yeah, just close it or look at an Angular issue. We're starting that. That's a thing now. Hashtag Friday afternoon Angular fix it.
Awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, so what contributing through documentation? I remember the first ngconf. I was really inspired by Igor's community talk, and I was, at the time I just felt like such a newbie at programming in general. I didn't feel like I could really contribute to anything. But then I think it was Igor who mentioned to me or maybe mentioned in his talk that documentation even is something that's fairly simple to do and can be very helpful. So I want to talk a little bit about what the process is of contributing to Angular. So let's go ahead and start with documentation. That's something that is a much less daunting task for people to do. So what's the process of contributing to Angular through documentation?
Who wants to go over it?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm talking way too much.
Okay, so I mean, we have this handy edit button in all the documentation changes, in all the documentation pages. Sorry. So if you go on the website and you see a typo or something, or even something that the documentation that isn't true, but usually let's say it's just a typo, you just press edit and then we take you to the GitHub edit, like the editor. Then you can change it and then do the commit from there. Or you could, if you can clone the repo on your computer and do the change. The end result is having a commit with that change, and your commit message should follow our standard of commit messages. So if you go on the Angularjs repo, there's the contributing.md file that's in the root, and we have this guideline on how you should contribute. And one of the main things is having the commit message follow our standard. And then we use those to generate our documentation and so on. Our changelog. Yeah, we use those to generate our changelog. So once you have that commit in your fork, you just send a pull request saying, hey, I did this change. Somebody will tell you to sign the CLI, which is like a small process. And then your PR will get reviewed by someone. Like, okay, yeah, this is good. And then the documentation change will get merged very easily because usually you just read it and you're like, yeah, that makes sense, and you merge it as a maintainer. So it's really not that complicated. You just have to create a commit like you've been doing anywhere else, following our commit message guideline, sign the CLI for legal stuff, and then you just merge it.
Cool. I have done that, gone through that process a little bit, and yeah, it is it's super easy. It's not that difficult to do. Even especially if it's just a typo or something, you just edit this, and the GitHub editor is actually surprisingly good. And so, especially if it's just text changes and stuff like that, then just go crazy. I remember at the first ngconf, people were complaining about the poor documentation, and I didn't quite agree. I didn't feel like Angular documentation was that bad, but anyway, like, before you go and complain about Angular documentation not being good, first find out why it's not good, and then go fix that. And it's pretty easy to do. And like Roderick said, I think like you don't actually have to clone the repo to push a fix like that. That's kind of a simple documentation change, which is really nice. But what if there's a case where for some reason I do need to clone the how difficult is the process for me to clone the repo and test something? So like, let's say I wanted to make a change to the documentation site itself, and not just some text in the documentation. Is that a difficult process, or how do I do that?
Well, if it was the documentation itself, I think you wouldn't be contributing to Angular, but the generator of documentation, which is djenny or Jenny. Is that right, Pavel?
Yeah, I think so. Jenny, yeah.
Yeah. So you'd be doing that change there, not in Angular. If you were changing the documentation website, like the architecture of the documentation. But if you're changing other stuff in Angular, like fixing something in scopes or something like that, so if doing a bug fix, then you would clone the repo, and in our README we tell you how to build it, how to run the tests. You should use grunt autotest to facilitate your workflow, so that every time you do a change, it runs your test, and then you can see if you broke something. That's great. So yeah, if you were doing a bigger change, not just documentation, if it was a fix, you probably should also introduce a new test. So that our testing directory just mirrors our source directory, so it's fairly easy to follow. And also, if you're introducing a new feature, you should also add tests to it. But if it was like a refactor or a style change, then it doesn't really matter for tests. And once you send the pull request, you should explain what your changes. Just imagine, how I see it is, you just imagine having a beer with a maintainer and like trying to explain to him what your changes. And then, I mean, the code is there, so we could see the change and try to understand it.
Yeah. So maybe like just add to this, like when I'm let's say looking at the pull request and like I'm about to merge it or reviewing it to be merged, like what we are looking for the bug fix, it's like a couple of things, and the first is like the test really, because like I don't think like we would merge today any bug fix without the associated test. Like we would write it ourselves if there's none in the pull request. But if I can see in a pull request a test that is kind of self-explaining, because it's small, it shows the issue, and our continuous integration server is saying that it's green, right? Because like every time you send a pull request, we run the whole suite of like automated tests, so both unit tests and integration tests. We are running some style checks and so on and so forth. So as soon as this thing is green and I can see a new test inside that makes sense for me, this is already like a very good indicator that the change is actually good. The other thing that I'm looking for is like a minimal set of changes. Like, I mean, let's say sometimes people want to do like a send a pull request which has the bug fix documentation change and like a small new feature, you know, kind of sneaking in. And this is like this is so hard to review, and we will like probably, you know, like it will take way too longer than necessary. We will ask you to split it into smaller commits anyway, and so on. So and the last thing is like the, you know, like really kind of bookkeeping. So like we need to make sure that it merges cleanly, that it follows the commit message. And like I would like to say that like I know that some people are kind of upset about our like strictness on the commit message format, but we are not doing this to annoy you. But actually, we are really using the changelog, like the commits from the repository to generate a changelog, all the like information about the breaking changes and so on. So it's like really part of our process. It's not like annoyance for you. So just to sum up, like add a test, make sure that the Travis CI is green, and try to do minimal changes. And like this will like increase the likelihood of your pull request being merged like enormously.
Cool. So, out of curiosity, you mentioned, Roderick, there are about 4,000 unit tests. How many tests by the CI server? Just out of curiosity, between the unit tests and the integration tests.
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
How many total tests are run by the CI server with the integration and unit tests?
So there's we passed the 4,000 unit tests. There's the documentation tests, which are like 100 and something. Then the end-to-end tests, which I'm not sure how much they are. But then we run them in like 6 different browsers, like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, IE, 9, 10, and 11. And like for Angular 1.2, we also ran it in IE 8. Like if you multiply them all together, it passes the 50,000 tests.
My goodness.
So like 6 browsers. Oh, we also run them with and without jQuery because that changes the behavior of Angular internally. So we want to make sure that all the tests pass if jQuery is present or not, and in all browsers. And different.
How long does that take the CI server to do? Like that's got to take more than a couple minutes.
I think like the CI is like taking way more than like 20 minutes right now. Like so all those tests and integration. Yeah, I think so. But like I mean like don't get don't get scared because like the actual unit test, which is the first line of defense and like really what you want to get running, they are like pretty fast. On my laptop I can like run entire suite in like less than 15 seconds. And like then when you change something, Karma will rerun them. You can make sure that you are running only a subset of tests. So it's like actually very, very easy to work in this kind of continuous testing, like really test-driven development mode. Like we really have good tools for this. It's not like you have to like rerun entire checks that we run on the CI server. You don't have to wait like 20 minutes after each.
So yeah, usually when I'm developing something, I just write my tests and I isolate it. So we're using Jasmine. You could use IIT. Just say run this test. So it takes just like 5 seconds just to run the test every change you do. And then once that test pass, then I would remove that IIT and it would run all the unit tests, which again takes like 30 seconds or so. It's more the end-to-end test and the documentation test that takes a lot more time, which you usually don't run while you're developing Angular. You just run them at the end.
Right, that's what CI is for anyway, right? So.
And I just looked on Travis. We have like 4 jobs that run together. Like in the last build, the one that took the most is 15 minutes. So you still get pretty good quick feedback if you send the request.
Oh, that's cool. That's wild that you run all those like 50,000 tests. That's like crazy. Good for you guys. Yeah, that's way cool. Okay, so let's see. Is there anything else that you guys want to mention to the community about contributing to Angular? Oh, actually, you know what? Before I ask for kind of the umbrella question, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention that I didn't think about earlier, and that is blogging and doing other things like that. That is a contribution to the community as well. Do you guys have any thoughts on blogs or like blogs that you would recommend or anything? Anything about that kind of contribution?
Well, I don't have anything like special to recommend. Sorry, but like I would just like to really say like it's so important. Like once again, like code is just one part of the story. Like getting people, like we are sometimes so into like, oh, this is new feature or this is like this bug fix that is kind of corner case, but like we are so into like fixing it that we sometimes like don't take time to communicate it properly. And like all those people that write the blog, oh, this is this new small feature, this is why it was introduced, this is how you use it. I mean, this is actually what makes framework usable for all the people on site.
Yeah, I personally read any blog post that comes in front of me that is related to Angular. So yeah, it's always makes me smile when I see new content, because I know that at the end it helps people, like the newbie people who are searching it on Google or are subscribed to some newsletter, it benefits a lot of people. So yeah, it's a big contribution to the community, I believe. Even if it's like constructive criticism of the library and so on, we do keep these stuff in mind.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's valuable. And like how-to videos on YouTube or whatever, I think is also really handy-dandy. So if you want to contribute and you're not sure about contributing to the source, contribute a blog post or a YouTube video or something. I think that's super useful. So also another question I wanted to ask was about contributing to Angular 2. Those of us who enjoy living on the bleeding edge and bleeding all over our keyboards. What would be the process if I wanted to get involved in Angular 2 development? What would I do to do that?
Okay, I can take this one. So I think like in terms of process, it's like pretty much the same. So like we like all those things we're talking about, like there needs to be a test, like a commit message, like a minimal set of changes, and so on and so forth. Like this still all applies. So then contributing to Angular 2 is like harder and easier at the same time. So it's obviously harder because it's a new framework. There's not a lot of information. A lot of things are changing. It's a new language that transpires to like Dart and so on and so on. So the barrier of entry is kind of higher, at least like currently. But at the same time, it's so easier to get into it because it's so fresh and things are changing. And there are probably so many things that you will bump into when you try to like use it now, that you will probably discover, corner cases or bugs or like, the things that like create a friction when you try to write something. So it's so easy to propose new things right now. I mean, it's so easy to get involved somehow because this thing is just being created, it's being born. So yeah, I would say like kind of harder and easier at the same time. So I would say like the best advice is like really try to play with it, and whenever you notice anything like a missing documentation, a bug, a corner case, or a thing that kind of doesn't make any sense to you, like discuss it on Gitter. We've got very active channel on Gitter, and if people say like yeah, I was like I was bumping into the same and so on, just open an issue and try to send a pull request. And I think like there's just like the best advice to like scratch your own itch, like like whatever you don't like, try to change it, and this is the best way of contributing.
I guess a good way of comparing Angular 2 to the current Angular.js is that Angular 2 is less strict when it comes to contribution, but more rough. So if you're adventurous, I mean, you'll probably learn so much just trying to contribute to it. The same thing for Angular.js. So yeah, if you're happy with working with a rough project, then you should definitely try to contribute to it.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, just like the learning opportunity, like this is something we didn't talk about, but like all those contributions, this is like such a massive learning opportunity. Like, I mean, on so many different levels. I mean, on the like the tooling, the language, the framework, the people, like interactions and so on. This is just such a wonderful like learning experience. I mean, I can't think of anything that is kind of better to kind of speed up the learning process.
So one thing I wanted to mention when sending a pull request to AngularJS, like one of the things I learned a lot doing so is about Git. Like I learned so much about Git tree-based interactive. Like so I would about like fetch versus pull. Like I would fetch upstream, then rebase against master, that whoever was going to merge that pull request could easily merge it without any merge conflicts. Like I wrote the code, so I would want to handle any merge conflict. Or also, like if you have a commit and you want to split it in multiple commits, about like git add interactive. I don't know if you've ever used that. You can interactively add chunks of code, like to the staging, and then commit those. Even if you've made 2 changes in one file, you could add part of a file. Like these are stuff like now I've used these concepts in other projects, and I just learned so much by contributing to Angular.
Sounds like you're a bit of a Git boss. I Yeah, I just use source tree. I'll be honest. Like, sometimes if it's just like a quick commit message, I can jump on the command line, no problem. But interactive rebases I've done before. But yeah, I'll just stick with my source tree.
If that works for you, that's what matters.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you to you guys for contributing to the project so heavily and being so involved in that. I just think people are greatly benefited because of that. So, do you have any other comments before we go into some questions?
Not really?
All right, cool. So let's. We did get 2 questions from our Q&A. Neither one of them is really related at all to contributing to Angular, but that's okay because you guys know Angular, and so we can chat about these really quick as well. So they're both from Harmeet from India. I think I said his name or her name right. I don't know. But let's yeah, we'll just quickly go through these. So the first question is, how can we fetch cross-domain data from JSON? Very general question. So yeah, if you guys have any answers, I'm sure Harmeet would be grateful.
Okay. So, like, yeah, I mean, I think this is like people are bumping quite often into those security protections, like built into a browser that doesn't allow you to, like, do cross-domain requests, unless the server is configured properly. So you can actually configure your server so the browser and server with like a special dance, like they will exchange headers, and then the browser will say like, okay, it's actually I can try to fetch things. So this is like what people refer to as cores. I mean, like there are plenty of articles on this and so on. The problem with the at least in the context of Angular 1 with this is that we are still supporting IE9 and IE8 in 1.2, and this is they actually in IE you don't have like a you've got non-standard implementation of VTHR that kind of doesn't work with the cores very well, which means that in practice we don't support cores in IE8 and 9. So I think your best bet here is just like to really proxy on your server, like whatever calls that you want to make. Because there are like techniques like a JSON-P, which are kind of very smart hacks, but this is not. You just kind of can't do all the types of requests. So I think that the best advice is like proxy on your server. Kind of, it requires some work, but at least it works every time across all the browsers.
Cool. Good answer. So the other question is, how can we can create our own plugin in Angular? And I think what he's talking about is like a module library. And I can go ahead and answer this one. I've done this quite a bit, and then you guys can mention. I'm not the creator of Angular formally. I'm the owner, the maintainer. The creator was Grant from Nimble, and he's awesome. And I'm really grateful for him creating this this awesome. It's actually very simple, especially with the Angular module system. It's just really easy to do. You just create a module, you add directives and whatever you want to that, and then you export that as some distributable file. So you have your like make sure you concatenate everything all together and whatever, and make sure that you declare your module before you use anything on it, and then. People just use it by your module name, and so there are some articles on how to distribute, or there's one article in particular I'm thinking of on it's called How to Distribute Your Angular Library, and I highly recommend. And so go take a look at that. It's by Kenzie Dodds on Medium, but yeah, it's really easy to do, and it's great because you contribute to the Angular community, and there are tons and tons of modules out there. You can go to ngmodules.org, and you'll just find tons of modules that you can look as examples. But do you guys have any other comments about that?
Well, just only quick comment that like I think like sometimes on the GitHub we'll tell people like, yeah, maybe this shouldn't be part of the core library, and people are kind of getting a bit upset because they've got the use case in front of them, like they maybe saw the same use case in several applications and so on and so forth. But somehow like Angular from the very beginning was we got this dependency injection container, which means that it's so easy to kind of partition your entire application into like smaller services that can interact together. So it's so easy, as you explained, just to create your own module. And we really don't want the core of the framework to grow into a mammoth that like does everything, but it's so heavy that in the end you can't use it. So I think like for us, if something is not like a use case that hits like really vast majority of people, it's a
Like
good
HTTP
candidate
stuff,
for
for
something
example.
for the user land. Yeah, and then like if something becomes really very popular in the user land, we can always pull it into the core, right? But like extensions are a really good way of like growing the capability of the framework.
I think a good example of that is I18N with the Angular translate message format getting pulled into Angular core. So
Exactly.
cool. All right. So last question, and this is just a general question that I asked to my guests, and the question is, what tip would you give a brand new developer? So I'll go ahead and start. Give you guys time to think if you haven't already thought. So I'm actually in Philadelphia. I live in Utah, so I'm visiting Philadelphia for Philly ETE. That's emerging tech for the enterprise, and I'm going to be speaking about Angular 2 tomorrow morning. Wish me luck. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's fun. So anyway, my tip for new developers is try to attend conferences and. Like if you can't, this is my story. So I don't have like tons and tons of money to go to conferences all the time. So what I do is I just blast all the conferences I can find with proposals and hope that I get to speak, because then I get to go to conferences for free. And if you don't feel like you're up to speaking at a conference, speak at meetups and you'll get comfortable. Like it's really just a lot of fun. But yeah, so go to conferences and if your employer education, then like hopefully they will pay for you to go to at least a conference here, because I think that's important for your personal development. It's also just a ton of fun to go interact with people who have different ideas and different experiences from you, and yeah, to develop those kinds of relationships. So that's my tip. Why don't we start with Roderick? What's your tip?
Well, to add on yours, well, I would boost meetups a lot more. Like meetups, at least I know in Montreal, there we have a ton of them. It's just so great going to them and interacting with people. Yeah, so a tip I would give to a new developer that wants to contribute to an open source, in my case, would be to just watch the GitHub repo. So GitHub has this functionality to watch a repository, and any activity that would happen on it will end up in your notifications. And I think by default it goes to your email, but you can turn that off. And I know, starting with Angular, one thing I did was watch the repository, and every once a day or every 2 days I would go on my notifications and just click on the activity that seemed interesting to me and just mark the other stuff as read, like I wouldn't care about them. That was a fast way for me to get familiar with all the stuff that were happening in the framework that interested me. So I've heard stories of like people who want to get involved in Rails, so they read all the issues that exist that are open. Like, you don't have to do that. Just watch it and open the notification that interests you. And even if you don't end up contributing, you get familiar with the project, and that helps you if you're using the framework a lot. So yeah.
Cool. Good tip. Paul.
So I think like it's funny because like I think the most important qualities in my eyes like are not like directly related to software development. So I would say, first of all, like when you are choosing the project to contribute, like choose something that is important for you, that like you really use at work, or you agree with the philosophy of this project and so on. Don't jump into a project because it's the most popular or like gets the most visibility. Really work on something that is important for you, because then you are going to stick with it. Then when you watch the GitHub repo and start to interact with people, like remember that even we are kind of not interacting together face to face, or you can hide behind the kind of anonymous internet. Like remember that you're talking to like a live people behind the scene. There's someone that is reading this issue. You like really interact with the live maintainers. So like take time to communicate in a clear way and like focus on the technical issue. because like if you really got into the community, we are going to meet face to face somewhere, and really you want to be remembered as the one that is very constructive, and not the someone that kind of screams a lot, like, and so on.
Yeah, you get it in your face. You're the guy who did this.
And the last thing is like give it time. I mean, sometimes it's probably hard to start and get into the community, but it takes easier with time. And actually, like with the good attitude and time, we can do wonderful things. So there's no reason to not have like a great contributions if you just give it time and focus on the clear and technical communication.
Great. Thank you guys for those tips. Do you guys have anything else? Well, here, I'll just close with the general announcements, and then I'll ask you if you had anything else that you wanted to just mention. So again, we're meeting with Julie, Ralph, Andres Dominguez, and Zan Thresh next week, April 14th. Same time, same place. We're talking about Angular and testing. So that should be an exciting episode. And then, as always, follow us on Twitter and Google+, and check out the website to keep up to date with the latest and greatest things coming from Angular Air. And yeah, that's it for me for announcements. Do you guys have anything else that you'd like to say before we close up?
I want to say that currently we have 1,215 contributors on the Angularjs repo. So let's get that number even higher. And also on the Angular/Angular, which is Angular 2 repo, we just have 61 contributors. So let's get that number up as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll just wrap this up. Thanks everybody for watching or listening, and especially thank you, Roderick and Paul, for joining us to talk about contributing to Angular, and not just Angular source, but the Angular community as a whole. So thank you guys.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
See you guys
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.